Shout out to Jocelyn Johnson and the whole Black Expo family for that. Once again, March 7th at the Charleston Visitor Center. We'll be at the Camden Suite, Camden Room for the Culinary Suite, and the ZD Experience is producing that. So we are actually coupling culinary art, performing art, as well as visual art. So it'll be an immersive experience for the attendees. So once again, more information can be found at not only the ZD Experience, but if you go to blackexposouth.com, you can also find information there. So, switching gears back to today's show with Professor Damon Fordham, I want to talk about Black folk tales and chronicles of South Carolina. Now, I want to ask Mr. Fordham, between the last release and this release, how long has it been?
2 years.
2 years. So is that a normal thing for you? Is it like every 2 years you come out with a new book, or is it just whenever you feel?
Well, it worked that way the last couple of times, but essentially I want to space it out every 2 years to give each book a time to,
Yes.
get a following and gain some momentum and such. And so I'm already working on the sequel to this one as we speak. But,
Beautiful.
but because so far it's been amazing to me how it's already been sold out of various popular internet forums, as well as various local bookstores that have had a hard time keeping it on the shelves.
Yeah.
So I really feel good about that, especially with considering the message that this is trying to convey.
So this is a pretty intense collection of Black stories.
Right.
And I want to ask you, how long did it take for you to gather up all this information and just compile it into this book?
I'm glad you asked me that. It's actually been for some years, really. Because I grew up with that last generation of elders who loved to sit on the front porches and tell stories about their pasts and their experiences, as well as aspects of family history, their history, and the history of the country and so forth. And so I would always have a notebook with me when I talked to elders. Like, for example, my Aunt Barbara Montgomery Collier, in the book, she was from Spartanburg, that side of my family, whenever I would visit her, and here she'd tell me these stories, and then I'd go to my car and write them in the notebook, you see? And so I collected all of these, but I didn't think that there would be a market for them. It was just basically for my own leisure, right? So when I went to Africa and met the griots, the storytellers of Africa, who told stories in proverb form to educate the people, as well as the history of these communities and all of that. I figured I would put it all together, both the American stories and these, in a book. Now, how that worked out is interesting. Not only did I include the African folk tales and the folk tales of my family, but I found out that in 1892, a white woman named Abby Holmes Christensen interviewed a Black storyteller named Prince Baskin down in Port Royal. And that was one of the first books of African-American folklore. It was called Afro-American Folk Tales Told Around the Campfire. Then in 1923, there was a lady by the name of Elsie Clues, who went down to Port Royal and collected folk tales from there in a book called South Carolina Black Folklore. Sea Island Folklore. And then in 1936, they had the Negro Writers, the Federal Negro Writers Project, where they had Black people interviewing Black elders about the Charleston Race Riot, the Denmark Vesey Rebellion, the early Black schools, ex-slaves who went on to become teachers and so forth. And this stuff was never published. It was in the archives at USC. So I put some of that in the book.
Got it.
And then at Claflin University in 1945, there was J. Mason Brewer, a Black professor who went around South Carolina with the Negro Folklore Guild, collecting stories from the various Black communities of South Carolina. And he put it in a book called Humorous Folk Tales of the South Carolina Negro, and one of the few copies left is at the Avery Institute.
Amazing.
So I put all of this stuff in the book. Because you see, people know about how singing and dancing and all of that got us over, but very few really have done studies on how folk tales and storytelling got us over. To give you an example of this, there's a story I just told you earlier about how in 1895, these black leaders tried to stop them from segregating the state, right? The architect of segregation was a man named Ben Tillman here in South Carolina, Benjamin Ryan Tillman. And there was a folk tale that was collected in Orangeburg in 1944 by a man named Murray Holiday, who said that one day on the Senate floor, one of the black representatives was basically just chopping Ben Tillman up on the debate floor with his arguments. And Ben Tillman got disgusted and said, "Why, you dirty black rascal, I'll swallow you alive." Wow. And the black man replied, "If you do, you'll have more brains in your belly than you did in your head." And you can see how that story, need I say more? And there's another one, a Brer Rabbit story, more about Brer Rabbit in a little bit, where it said that Brer Rabbit was told by a lady down in Port Royal in 1919, said that Brer Rabbit had stolen some of the animals' food, and the animals took Brer Rabbit to court and sentenced him to hang, right? And so the rabbit was in the jail all crying and everything, and the crane came by and said, "Man, Brer Rabbit, I sure feel sorry for you." And Brer Rabbit said, "Brother King, you might be able to help me out." He goes, "How's that?" So he called the crane over and he whispered in his ear. And so the next day, the animals gathered around the gallows and they started yelling, "Hang Brer Rabbit! Hang Brer Rabbit!" And so the jailer took Brer Rabbit out in the handcuffs over to where the scaffold was, where they had the noose, right? And they were like, "Hang the rabbit! Hang the rabbit!" And they were just about to put the rope around the rabbit's neck when a voice came from the clouds, "That rabbit ain't done nothing, let him go." And the animals went, "Ah!" And they started running away, right? So the crane flew from behind the clouds, went to Brer Rabbit, unloosed him, and Brer Rabbit said, "Good job, Brother Crane."
Oh, man.
So you could see
yes,
how a story like that, during the days of lynching and and such things, how a story like that would help get the people over. That was told by a lady named Maria Middleton, who was born in slavery in Port Royal, South Carolina. Many of these people were illiterate, but they knew how to tell stories, to explain things, and to express their feelings.
That's good. All right, so I want to read a little bit of the back of the book, and I want to ask you after I read this, what do you hope people will take away from this?
Gladly.
People who are not, well, everybody, really. Because I went to your book release. Now, mind you, I was a little late, but you had a mixed group of people there.
Right.
You know, you have people who are really, really interested in learning the history and understanding more of the stories that you tell. So throughout history, African Americans passed along folk tales to ease burdens and make sense of experiences. Tracing back to West Africa, this storytelling tradition provided laughter, instruction, and resilience. Animal stories were often proverbs for adults and teaching points for children. Two pioneering Black school teachers told of their careers in education. An eyewitness described the Charleston race riot in 1919. Others gave testimonies of Denmark BC's attempted slave rebellion. Author Damon L. Fordham presents this collection of Black South Carolina stories and narratives based on interviews and research, including his travels in Africa. So I'm going to ask you that question.
Okay. Well, basically, it kind of speaks for itself, but the essence is to show the multi-dimensional nature of not just South Carolina Black history, but of Black history in America in general.
Yes.
You see, Dr. Henry Louis Gates, who does the Finding Your Roots show, well, he's my friend and mentor, and he wrote a book called The Annotated African American Folk Tales. And so I told you about these notebooks where I collected all these stories, right? I didn't think that there would be any public interest outside of folklore scholars in such a book. But when his book became successful, and he signed my copy incidentally, I contacted him and I said, "Hey, you know, I've got this stuff filled with stories like this about South Carolina, and I don't want you to think I'm a copycat or anything." He's like, "No, go for it, man, it's fine." So that's why I mentioned him prominently in the book, because he encouraged me that there would be a market for this type of thing. And with the way the book has been selling, it's been absolutely right. So I want people to understand that, yes, people went through slavery. Yes, people went through segregation. Yes, people went through lynching, but it did not destroy them.